In March 2021, the then 25-year-old model Hailey Bieber, while enjoying a peaceful morning breakfast with her husband, started to experience a very weird sensation that traveled down from her arms to her shoulder. She couldn't speak, and the right side of her face was drooping, which alarmed her husband, who believed she was having a full-blown stroke. After being rushed to the hospital, it was revealed that Bieber had suffered from a mini-stroke, which she ultimately ended up recovering from. How could a healthy 25-year-old suffer a stroke, you may ask? Bieber's doctor gave her a host of factors that likely contributed to her health scare: a recent COVID diagnosis, the stress of travel, and also birth control. While birth control refers to various methods of preventing pregnancy, the term is most commonly associated with its most popular iteration, the birth control pill. As of 2019, the United Nations found that around 151 million women around the world use the pill, which, in its conventional form, functions by producing hormones in women's bodies which prevent ovulation, effectively putting a pause on a woman's fertility, which experts maintain can resume back to normal once she stops taking the pills. Like all magical fixes, however, it does seem like the promising guise of birth control pills comes with a trade-off, and it may be at the expense of women's health. Bieber isn't alone in the camp of women who have been negatively affected by the effects of birth control. In fact, recent research has demonstrated that hormonal birth control can increase a woman's risk of cancer, blood clotting, and strokes. In addition to that, many women have detailed their experiences with birth control online, explaining how they felt like a new person getting off of it, with many vastly underestimating the long-term emotional consequences of sustained use. Many women lament about the unfair nature of the standard which has been accepted in our popular culture, one that expects women to control and suppress their fertile potential, while men seemingly get a free pass. Despite all this, the birth control pill remains one of the most popular methods of birth control in the world. But why would women willingly take a pill which introduces a host of potential side effects, endangering their health and making them more vulnerable to instances of anxiety and depression? Often, taking birth control and other forms of contraception is treated as a monotonous, value-neutral task. After all, everyone does it, so why would it be an issue? Some even reason that birth control can't be wrong, since it doesn't actively harm or take innocent human life, as opposed to abortion. Birth control, they say, simply involves the prevention of conception. And can that really be a bad thing? First of all, even the feminists who advocated for the societal acceptance of birth control did not see it as a value-neutral invention. They saw it as a key step towards achieving the liberation of women. But notice the hidden assumption here. If the net social impact of birth control usage can be ethically evaluated as a step forward for women's liberation, it seems that there is at least one instance of technology operating within and advocating a set of values. Birth control, if it functions to liberate women and unchain them from the social and physical consequences of sex, is not a value-neutral technology. However, I want to point out what I view as a fundamental flaw in the feminist line of reasoning. The way that women are positioned to become equal to men, according to second-wave feminists, is to free them from the normal functioning of their female body. Birth control, contrary to being a value-neutral practice accepted by most of society, has actually contributed to the widespread adoption of a particular philosophy, the culture of contraception, which has contributed to the erosion of the intrinsic dignity of female bodies, opening the doors for other social ills to manifest in our culture. Birth control has long operated in the background, falsely advertising itself as a value-neutral player in the game of human behavior. Its long-term implications for our view of the human person have long been overlooked due to a simplistic interpretation of its effects, which has largely focused on the immediate ramifications of its usage. However, the presuppositions about female fertility and the purpose of human sexuality, which contraceptive culture has wrought on the world, have been largely overlooked. Before I continue, I do want to make one point really clear. My goal is not to argue that every single instance of contraceptive use is unjustified and harmful. I am not speaking to the married couple who has chosen to use condoms because they need to avoid conceiving for a year because of serious financial concerns. I'm speaking to a culture which has made the active suppression of fertility, specifically female fertility, for the purposes of increasing sexual freedom and women's equality, an accepted modern standard, despite the serious health risks, both physical and mental, that it poses. Elizabeth Kissling is a professor of women's and gender studies at Eastern Washington University, and she has called the gratuitous usage of this pill the largest uncontrolled medical experiment on women in history. She states, The pill isn't a treatment for menstrual irregularities, it's a way of refusing to treat them. Doctors are so quick to prescribe the drug to teenagers reporting bad cramps without investigating to see if there is an underlying cause. The problem with a lot of modern approaches to birth control is that it treats female fertility as a pathology that needs to be controlled rather than worked around, embraced, and understood. The pharmaceutical industry and the culture at large, in waging the feminist battle cry of bodily autonomy, have also ironically bought into the belief that a woman can only be made free if she becomes sterile, in effect, mimicking the male body. Abigail Favale, I'm so sorry if I've butchered how to say that name, makes this very precise observation in her comprehensive work, The Genesis of Gender. In it, she details her conversion story from a professor of gender studies to a Catholic woman wanting to make sense of the discombobulated sense of self our culture has largely adopted. She writes, "The current medical paradigm, lauded by most feminists, is a paradigm that pathologizes female fertility, viewing a woman's potential for pregnancy as an adverse condition to be medically managed. This medical management disrupts the wholeness of a woman's body rather than restoring it. And in this way, it is not in accord with the basic definition of health. A Catholic vision of women's health and family planning, in contrast, would educate medical practitioners and women themselves in methods of fertility awareness, methods that work in harmony with a woman's body rather than against it. This vision, in contrast, provides a fertility-positive approach to women's health, an approach that does not see a woman's body as a threat to her freedom and happiness, but rather as something good, worthy of deeper understanding and respect." This trend, furthermore, is not accidental. In fact, it seems that the practices accepted by our institutions have a hidden, insidious philosophy at their core, one that reduces the human body to an instrument of the autonomous self. Favale notes that this dualistic split in identity, one that separates the body from the self, characterizes the paradigm of modern feminist thought. At the very least, one camp of modern feminist thought. Under this view of the person, the body becomes an obstacle to overcome. Even more troubling is the fact that, to the feminists that paved the theoretical groundwork for these assumptions about the body, and the technologies and the behaviors that spring from it, the human body isn't just a valueless tabula rasa that needs to have meaning etched onto it through the activation of the human will. The female body is intrinsically at odds with this will, due to the constraints the inherent capacity to house and birth other human body has on women's choices. In other words, the female body in its most natural form is treated as intrinsically at odds with the goal of female liberation and even inferior to the natural role and function of male bodies. Favale articulates this point brilliantly in her book by drawing on the very influential and long-lasting work of feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir's account of the human condition puts a woman necessarily at war with herself, with the given state of her embodiment. Woman is an absurdity. She is an autonomous freedom trapped in a body that is designed to house another. Her only hope is to fight against her facticity, always to become as much like man as possible. In order for a woman to create herself, she must repudiate herself. She must recognize the feminine as devoid of meaning and turn her gaze, her aspirations, toward the masculine ideal. Birth control is just one example of a larger overarching problem, the progression of which can be summarized in 3 important steps. First, the splitting of the real self from the body. You've probably heard this manifest itself in phrases such as, "be true to yourself," or "I am not my body," or "I need to align my body with my true self." Second, the denigration of the physical, with all the consequences it provides, which acts as a roadblock to the aims of the true self. Finally, the subduing of nature, so the controlling of the natural self to reach the ultimate purpose of human life, through which we can justify our existence, the only way that we can draw meaning out of our meaningless and stupid and absurd lives is to just will it into being. Autonomy is the active ability to exercise one's will, and it is the central aim of the autonomous man. You can find traces of this philosophy in phrases such as, "be true to yourself," or "do whatever makes you happy." It is an ethical egoism which seeks to subdue nature in order to maximize the amount of choices an individual can make. The ethical limitations on behavior are subsequently set by people, a sort of product of our social imagination. However, that too is also a consequence and construction of human will. As a social construct, It is not objectively or universally binding, and as a product of human engineering, it is susceptible to corruption and, many would argue, is also hopelessly arbitrary. Contrast this with a Christian view of the self, which recognizes the existence of human choice, which is an inherent capacity of human nature, the existence of which is inherently good. Human choice, however, is not limited by an arbitrarily set rule regarding who a person is allowed to affect and how and to what extent. It's not decided by a vote, it's not decided by the majority or the minority elite, or the whims and desires of the self. Rather, the limitations on human freedom are set by the objective decrees of God, dictates which are etched into the fabric of reality and in human nature itself. While Christianity recognizes the role of sin in distorting and corrupting the natural self, the law of God is nonetheless written on our hearts and on our bodies. And so Christianity leaves us with a view of reality that is inviting and that is good. I can look to the world around me and to my body and to the other bodies that occupy it, and I can see something that is purposeful. I don't need to subdue nature and control it and deny it in order to make my own will known, because everything around me is chaotic and in flux and absurd. The Christian worldview offers a purposeful, coherent, and honestly beautiful vision of reality, and also of the human person. Birth control is but one manifestation of a larger social ill, which sees the human body as something that's bad, especially the female body, something that needs to be controlled, and something that needs to mimic the male body in order to be free. And this has resulted in many women being hurt, physically and emotionally. And it actually has increased the rate of abortion and unwanted pregnancy through contributing to a worldview of transactional sexual encounters and through this assumption of perpetual sterility. Instead of telling women to look into their body, to understand who they are, to embrace their active potential as a woman, to rear human life, which is a beautiful and amazing and unique thing, we tell women to deny that. We tell them that that's not essential to their femininity. And in so doing, we erase the very concept of woman. And I think that is a really big issue.